Anatoly Moskvin was born on September 1st, 1966 in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia's fourth largest city and a center of military research that stayed closed to foreigners during most of the Soviet era. He was an only child, showing unusually high intelligence from a young age, and it was even thought that his level of intelligence was that of a genius. He was one of the highest achieving students in his class. Although academically a success, he found it difficult to connect with his peers. His parents described him as socially awkward and very quiet growing up. He would spend most of his time by himself, reading. He would even teach himself to speak foreign languages, while other children were out playing. When Anatoly was 9 years old, a traumatic event would happen to him that would completely change his personality. He alleges that while he was walking home from school, a man approached him, dragged him into some wasteland, and sexually assaulted him. He didn't tell his parents after the attack, and they didn't find out until much later in his life. At the time, though, his parents noticed a drastic change in his behavior. Their quiet and withdrawn son turned into an angry child who would explode with violent outbursts. His parents had, of course, no knowledge of the trauma he had suffered, and so they just hoped Anatoly's mood swings would be a phase he would grow out of. As a schoolboy, Anatoly often enjoyed visiting cemeteries for hours at a time. He claims that he had always been interested in the subject of death, including burial rituals and the occult. There was one incident in particular that he remembered had a huge impact on him, and which he said was of a beneficial influence in his life. On March 4th, 1979, 13-year-old Anatoly was collecting waste paper with a friend. As they were knocking on doors, they noticed a coffin lid next to the doorway of a house. It was for the funeral of 11-year-old Natasha Petrova. The boys were scared because Natasha's mother was a member of a strange sect, and no classmates would be attending the funeral. Suddenly, several dozen women and men in black clothes came out. All of them held lit candles and mournfully sang a dirge in Hungarian. Anatoly and his friend were scared and attempted to run away, but several of the men rushed after them in pursuit. Soon Anatoly was grabbed by the shoulder and led back. A tear-stained woman, apparently the mother of the deceased, handed him a large apple and kissed him on the forehead. She led him to the coffin, promising a lot of sweets, oranges and money, and ordered Anatoly to kiss the dead girl. 11-year-old Natasha Petrova had died while taking a bath, during which there had been a blackout. The girl's mother tried to fix the problem herself, and managed to get the power on again. Leaving the bathroom, Natasha touched a bare wire with the end of her wet towel, and died instantly because the electricity hadn't been rewired properly. Anatoly burst into tears and begged to be released, but they insisted. One of the women forcibly bent his head to the waxy forehead of the dead girl, who was wearing a lace cap. The boy felt he had no choice and obliged. But suddenly some spell came over him, and he not only did it once, but twice and a third time. He was encouraged and ordered to repeat a spell in the old Russian language. Several lines from it are firmly engraved in his memory. "I could give birth to a daughter. I can help out of all troubles." Afterwards he was ordered to take a candle and drip wax on the chest of Natasha's blue dress. They then gave him 2 copper rings and ordered he put one on the dead girl's finger, and the other was placed on Anatoly's finger. Without letting go of him, they made a procession to the cemetery. On the way, the mother ordered him not to tell anyone about the incident for at least 40 days. Then they handed him a string bag of fruit and a 10-ruble note. Reaching adulthood, he attended Moscow State University, where he studied philology, which is the study of literature and language, and he specialized also in Celtic history. He was very studious and spent much of his time alone in the library or at home reading books. He didn't socialize with women, drink, or smoke. He lived a reclusive lifestyle and still lived at home with his parents. Even though he shared the apartment with his parents, the pair traveled constantly, and so he was mostly alone during the summer months. Anatoly had built a personal library of over 60,000 books and documents related to everything involving death. He spoke 13 different languages and would write many different books and papers that were well known and respected amongst his academic colleagues. Because of his vast knowledge as a necropolist, a term he coined for himself as an expert on cemeteries and the dead, and anything related to death, many times he would be asked by local newspapers and other publications to contribute when they had any topics related to death. In one instance, between 2005 and 2007, Anatoly was hired to list the names of the dead in hundreds of different cemeteries across the region, which was of keen interest to him. He got to visit 752 different cemeteries, and in many cases he would stay overnight in the graveyards, sometimes even sleeping in empty vaults if he could find no accommodation locally while he was working in a particular area. People started to notice that he was spending much time in cemeteries, which they naturally thought peculiar. Their strongest suspicion was that perhaps he was vandalizing the graves. The police were even called to investigate, but when they showed up, Anatoly would flash his academic credentials, and his presence was easily explained. He would, though, be approached several times by the police, because locals began to notice that the graves of their loved ones were being dug up. Anatoly also regularly contributed to a publication called Necrologies, a weekly paper that published obituaries and stories about cemeteries and famous dead people. Some of his compositions were titled Great Walks Around Cemeteries and What the Dead Said. The editor of Necrologies would later say that sometimes he felt uncomfortable about publishing some of his articles, particularly the ones that would elaborate on the 11-year-old deceased girl he had been forced to kiss when he was 13. From the way that they were written, it sounded as if Anatoly really felt like the pair were married, and would go into detail about the love that he felt for her. This really should have been a red flag that the author was very disturbed, but the editor would later say that Anatoly was a loner who had certain quirks, but he gave no indication that he was up to anything deviant or criminal. In May of 2003, he had a fight with his parents because they would not give him their blessing to adopt a girl from an orphanage. Russian adoption agencies wouldn't let him adopt a child because he didn't make enough money. Anatoly told his mother that he would practice black magic and contact the spirits of dead children, mummify their bodies and invite them to stay at home. He was very upset at the situation and went for a walk around the Red Etna Cemetery to calm down. While on this meditative stroll, he noticed the grave of a young girl. He suddenly had an idea. If they won't let him adopt a living child, he will give a dead one a new home. In the evening, he returned to the grave, and using a shovel and chisel, he finally reached the coffin. The coffin was upholstered in crimson synthetic material. He made a hole in the lid of the coffin and through it pulled out what was left of the body. It was in a very decomposed condition and covered in maggots. Although he had studied the techniques of mummification, he had never attempted it before. Well, there was always a first time for everything. He moved the body to a remote corner of the cemetery and reburied it in the abandoned grave of an elderly woman. Extract from Anatoly Moskvin's confessions after his incarceration. To properly mummify the body, you need soda and salt in various proportions. I bought these substances in the store, found old nylon stockings in the garbage and made bags out of them. I poured soda and salt into them and put the human remains into them. I changed these bags once a week. Moisture has an extremely negative effect on the mummification process. Therefore, so that condensation does not stay on the body, I covered it with cellophane. On July 25, 2003, I wrapped the body in various clothes and carried it back to my home in my backpack. For 2 days I worked on the body. I stuffed rags inside, applied women's sanitary pads, and also put the scalp inside. Then I sewed up the body with threads and made a wax mask on the face. By the way, the girl's head was half demolished. I already had the skull of a child, so I sawed out the corresponding fragment from this child's skull and built it into the mummy's head. Then I melted the wax from the candles on the mummy's face, and then covered it with nail polish which I'd found in the garbage. After that I wrapped the body in pantyhose and put on her clothes, which was also found in the garbage. During the second half of 2003, I slept with this doll at night. This ritual continued for several years until the authorities realized they had to do something about the reports of graves being opened. Russian Interior Ministry spokesman General Valery Gribakin spoke of the investigation at that time. "Our leading theory was that it was done by some extremist organizations. We decided to beef up our police units and set up groups composed of our most experienced detectives, who specialized in extremist crimes." But for nearly 2 years the investigation went nowhere. Graves continued to be desecrated, and no one knew why. Then in 2011, authorities heard reports of graves being vandalized. Investigators were led to a cemetery where someone was painting over the enamel photos on the graves of Muslims, but not damaging anything else. That someone was Anatoly Moskvin. 8 police officers accompanied him to his apartment located on Lenin Avenue in Nizhny Novgorod, for what they initially thought would be to gather evidence of his defacement of Muslim graves. What they discovered there as they moved through the cluttered apartment was a sight they would never forget to their dying day. The 45-year-old quietly followed the officers as their jaws slowly dropped. What at first was shocked fascination slowly turned into horror. They found life-sized, doll-like figures throughout the apartment. The figures at first resembled antique dolls to them. They wore expensive and varied articles of clothing. Some wore knee-high boots, others had makeup on over the grotesque, mask-like faces. He had hidden their skeletal hands in fabric. The officers came to the realization that they were gazing upon the mummified corpses of human girls. When a policeman moved one of the bodies, it played a gentle melody. Inside the chest cavities of many of the dolls, Anatoly had embedded music boxes. There were also photographs and plaques taken from the gravestones, doll-making manuals and maps of local cemeteries strewn about the apartment. Police even discovered that the clothes worn by some of the mummified corpses were often the clothes in which they were buried. There were also personal belongings and clothing placed inside some of the mummies. One mummy had a piece of her own gravestone with her name scrawled on it inside the husk of her body. Another one contained a hospital tag with the date and the cause of the girl's death. A dried human heart was found inside of a third body. He had also inserted buttons and doll's eyes into the eye sockets so that they could watch cartoons with him. Some of them were lying on top of the books, some were lying on furniture, and all were wearing brightly coloured clothing. One of the mummified corpses was wearing a knitted hat, a purple sweater, white tights and white shoes. It was propped up in a corner with the legs crossed. There was another dried corpse with curly blonde hair, wearing a silk wedding dress with a long veil. All had beige pantyhose pulled over the remains of their faces. The police discovered in total 26 bodies, the youngest being only 3 years old and the oldest around 19. They had been stolen from their graves, preserved and dressed as dolls. When interviewed by police back at the station, he admitted that he had made these dolls over the course of 10 years. And while technically he had shared the apartment with his parents, they were completely clueless and thought he was just making Russian folk dolls. His 83-year-old mother, Elvira, would say, "We saw these dolls, but we did not suspect there were dead bodies inside. We thought it was his hobby to make such big dolls, and did not see anything wrong with it." While his neighbours would often note a sickly sweet smell wafting from his apartment, they never suspected anything, blaming the odour on decomposing rodents in the basements of the buildings. He was very quiet, he kept to himself, but they also said that he was always very respectful whenever they met in the street. When questioned, he denied having any sexual attraction to the dead bodies, and said he felt like they were his children. Anatoly also stated that he decided to remove these girls from their graves because he said their parents had abandoned them, and so he felt sorry for them and wanted to give them a comfortable home, and ultimately preserved their bodies until science caught up where they could actually be brought back to life at some point. In his warped mind, he was taking care of these little girls, not doing any actual harm. In court, he said to the parents of the children he stole from different cemeteries,
"You abandoned your girls. I brought them home and warmed them up."
To find these abandoned children, he would scour through the obituaries. If he came across an obituary that he felt a spiritual connection with, he would visit the cemetery and actually sleep on the grave. He believed that by doing this, he would know whether or not the spirit of that child wished to be brought back to life. While studying Celtic culture, he noticed that the Druids and the people of Siberia, specifically the culture of the ancient Yakuts, had been adept at carrying this ritual out. Quote from Anatoly, "I've been doing this for a long time, for about 20 years. I always checked whether it was demons coming or whether it was spirits coming. I made sure that it was the spirits of dead children really communicating with me." According to Anatoly, he had these children's full permission to raise them from their graves, and would never dig up a child who did not consent to it. Eventually he grew tired and uncomfortable sleeping on these graves, so instead he just brought them straight home, where he would sleep next to them and try to hear them converse with him. Anatoly Moskvin was charged with the desecration of graves and dead bodies, a charge which carried up to 5 years in prison. However, he was deemed unfit to stand trial in 2012 and was instead sent to a psychiatric hospital, where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. His parents live in utter isolation as their community has ostracized them. Elvira suggested to her husband that perhaps they should just kill themselves, but her husband has refused. Lawyers for Anatoly say that after years of treatment, he is now well enough to become an outpatient, and that he wants to move to Moscow and get married. They say he also plans to write a book and get a job as a language teacher, taking advantage of the fact that he speaks 13 languages. Before his arrest, it was revealed that he had never had a girlfriend and was still a virgin. But after his arrest, he had apparently struck up a friendship with a languages student, a 25-year-old graduate of the philological faculty of one of the Nizhny Novgorod universities, who had confessed her love for him. If any of the children did not like me at all, I took them back and buried them back in their own graves. He is further quoted as saying, "I did not mutilate, did not dismember in any way, treated them gently, affectionately, politely, even tried not to swear in front of these children, because children are not allowed to hear swear words, especially since they were all girls before. So I tried to behave myself at all times. The fact is that I suffered a lot from loneliness, especially in the summer, when my parents were away, and took the cat with them." Well, in hindsight, one can fully understand why the parents took the cat with them when they went away on holidays. Oh my goodness. Well, my dears, that was the last in the Halloween series. Next episode will be something completely different. I do hope you've enjoyed this spooky period. Actually, I had Anatoly's voice here, sort of deep and creepy, but I actually heard his voice afterwards, and he has a rapid, high-pitched voice. Oh well, I'm not going to go back and change it. I think it doesn't sound so spooky when it's sort of high-pitched and rapid, does it? So I'll leave it as it is. He's probably more to be pitied than reviled. I mean, he didn't actually murder anyone. As revolting as his deeds were, he didn't actually murder anyone. Well, at least not that we know of. I doubt it. And it's quite obvious where his problems began. I'll just fill you in on something before I continue. Apparently in his 30s he had a girlfriend, and she said he made it clear from the start that he didn't want to have a sexual relationship, but wanted to adopt children with her. And they both applied, apparently, and were knocked back because they didn't have enough money. So that would indicate to me that he was impotent or had some sort of sexual dysfunction, which has not been clearly defined in any sources that I've looked through. So let's just say that his impotence was of a psychological nature. When he was 13 and this incident happened with the funeral and he had to kiss the dead girl, his hormones are starting to awaken, a sexual awakening, and this is the poignant memory, kissing this dead girl, his first experience with the opposite sex. And so that has been the main focal point of his mind ever after. He was caught in a moment in time which became obsessively morbid. There you go, Oddie the psychologist. What do you think? Do you think that's where Anatoly's problems stemmed from? You know, when I say that he didn't kill anyone as far as we know, but, and as I say, I doubt that he did, but he did cause a lot of distress to the parents and families of these girls that he dug up and mummified. I mean, it's terrible. And I'll read a few pages that I found in Russian, which I've translated. The parents talking about exactly that. Before I go to those pages, this girl here was one of the girls that he removed from her grave and mummified her, and her parents were horrified to find out afterwards, of course. And this poor girl had no life, really. I don't mean with the parents, I mean what happened to her, just cut down so soon in life. Apparently she wanted to go and visit the grandmother, a short walk from her home, and a junkie that lived in the same building as her apparently wanted to rob her for her earrings and started to drag her to his apartment. I suspect there was something more involved, and he murdered her. I mean, horrible. And then she gets dug up by some weirdo and mummified. Absolutely tragic. This letter I'm showing on the screen now was one of many that Anatoly Moskvin left on her grave, much to the distress of her parents, who would have that horror every time they went to visit her grave. Things had been rearranged or removed, and these bizarre, endearing letters to her they would find. I mean, really, I don't think he realizes how much harm he has done to these girls' families. Very, very sad. So this is from a site called medium.com about the actual story that I presented, and this was also about the girl that I was talking about at the end. Her body was found in the attic of the building, wedged behind some pipes 5 months later. Absolutely tragic. Anyway, they laid her to rest on the 2nd of October 2002 and were erecting and painting a small metal fence they'd put round the grave. The next day they came back to finish and felt someone had been there as a reef had been moved. Later that same month they found a note signed with 2 letters D.A., standing for Dobry Angel or Kind Angel, the name Moskvin used to refer to himself. We shivered with fear each time we went to the grave, not knowing what to expect, Natalia said. These sick anonymous notes were addressed to my daughter, calling her little lady. He congratulated her on all the public holidays. He remembered about the 1st of September each year, the first day of the school year in Russia, and the last school bell in May. He counted carefully which school grade she was about to enter as if she were still alive. For example, happy last month of your 6th year at school. Imagine what it was like for us, her grieving parents, reading these notes about our murdered daughter. It was not at all like some sick joke, but a spear through our hearts. Horrible. He just didn't realize that. I think he was so deluded and so... I would say he's insane, though they haven't actually classed him as that, have they? But I would say so. It's very, very sad. Sometimes the confused parents arrived at the grave to find soft toys stolen from other plots. Oh my goodness, it gets worse. And on January the 1st they would find New Year's decorations on the grave. One note, however, became threatening. If you don't erect a great monument which she deserves, we will dig her body out. We, it's him, okay. That's not nice. He's just causing absolutely massive distress to the parents, and it's with good reason that he was incarcerated for such a long time. He's still in there. The grieving parents erected a headstone in June 2003 and returned to find messages on it and that an axe had been taken to it. My goodness. What did she say? Natalia reported it to the police, who told her there was little they could do. They told us, if you find him, do what you want to this barbarian. We won't object. They don't muck around, the Russian police, do they? At this point, we knew nothing about Moskvin, or that by now he had already removed her. But if I'd met him at Olga's grave, I would have killed him with my bare hands, where you can totally understand the mother's sentiments. And she didn't even realize, that must have been even more horrific for her afterwards, that she was going to the grave and laying flowers and stuff, and the poor girl wasn't even in the grave. Natalia wanted to move to a new flat and try and rebuild her life, but Igor, that must be the husband, refused to leave their flat, where he sat for hours on end in Olga's room. The strain drove them apart. I just could not live in the block where my daughter was murdered, and Igor did not want to sell the flat. He would go into Olga's room and stare at her things. Finally, I left and went to live with my mother. It's just absolutely tragic on all counts. The junkie has destroyed their life, and this Anatoly Moskvin has really just put the final stain on it, I don't know, some people have some really tragic fates. The girl and her family. I said at the start we should have pity on him, but my pity has fast dissolved, really. I hadn't actually read that. I had saved the page, but I read it for the first time. Very sad. I read there was reports that he might get out soon. I think that was 2021. There was a court hearing that he wanted to be released and get married to some woman. I could not find a photo of her. I was very curious. Of course you would. I think you would be too. Doesn't look like she's in it for the publicity, because there's no image of her to be found. So what on earth does she see in him? I guess there's someone for everyone, really. So he wants to get out and get married to her and write a book, etc. Obviously a very intelligent guy, 13 languages. They have refused it. They're keeping him in. So, well, my dear ones, I think we have been through the horror and the tragedy, and I will leave you with my blessings, and the next episode will be something light-hearted. Well, perhaps not actually light-hearted, but not horror-orientated. Or crime. I'm going to try and find some eccentric or something like that. But before I go, loyal followers of my channel are probably thinking, wow, we know Oddie likes cemeteries. He's done a few episodes where he's walked around cemeteries. Maybe he's doing a Moskvin. You never know. Well, I can assure you, my dears, I have never had the desire to dig up a rotting corpse, nor would Odette allow me to bring one home. And I do not have any life-size Russian dolls, I can assure you of that. No, I am very fond of cemeteries. As you would know if you've been around my channel for quite a while, I've done a few walks around Swiss cemeteries, and they are such peaceful places. I do like them. I do like them indeed. I love to see the different types of gravestones and try and imagine how these people were in life. A shout out to a long-lost ex. If you are still alive, if you are out there, I'm not going to mention her name, but the last I knew, she had moved to Southport in Queensland, Australia. If you're still there, and perchance you happen upon my videos and recognize my voice, let me know. I'd like you to know I have very fond memories, and I'm sure you know that. Anyway, wherever you are, I hope life is treating you well. It's funny how fast the years go by, my dear viewers. I think you'll agree. My ex and I never thought we'd reach 35. Wow. And how quickly the years have slid by since then. Amazing. Not that I'm tired of Odette. I love her very much. Very, very much indeed. But the topic of cemeteries reminded me of my ex, which I'll explain very soon. Yes, but it's been many, many years. Quite a few decades have passed since then, but I have fond memories, and I'm saying that because we used to go to Waverley Cemetery. Now, Waverley Cemetery I've mentioned in a previous episode. Beautiful cemetery, right on the cliffs there, down at Waverley. Absolutely gorgeous spot overlooking the Pacific ocean, and we used to have picnics at Waverley Cemetery and smoke joints and things like that, things that goths did back then. Actually, the very last time I saw her, she came down to visit me one last time. She'd already moved to Southport, and you never guess where we went. You guessed it, Waverley Cemetery. That was actually the very last time that I saw her. I did speak to her on the telephone, but that was the last time I saw her, Waverley Cemetery, all those years ago. If you're out there, fond and fiery memories. Take care, my dears. I'm off now. God bless, goodbye, and until next time, bye-bye.